Hi there, Michael here. In today's video I have a chat with Gert Keunen, lecturer, composer, producer, mastering engineer and author of the book Stereo Was a Nice Try. If you haven't come across this book yet, I highly recommend checking it out. I'll leave a link in the description below. It's probably the most comprehensive guide to immersive audio on the market today. During our conversation, I mentioned that the book answers pretty much any question I've ever got about immersive audio on my channel, and that is no exaggeration. It's that deep. Gert also teaches music history, music sociology, and music production in Ghent and Brussels, and I was blown away by his knowledge of immersive audio and music production in general. In the following, we chat about how to get started in Dolby Atmos, how to set up an immersive audio studio on a budget, what software to use, and what mixing secrets to apply. We even get into beer at the end. You definitely do not want to miss this. So let's turn it over to Gert. Okay, first of all, thank you, Gert. I hope I pronounced it correctly, but I'm going to probably mispronounce that throughout that interview. Thank you for coming on, and congratulations to your book, which is really outstanding. And we talked a little bit earlier, and I said that pretty much any question anybody has ever asked me about the Dolby Atmos is answered in your book. So it's a very hard recommend from my side. And I felt, because you are active in our Discord, I felt it actually makes sense to kind of get together and talk a little bit about your book and what the book is about and how it can help people interested in immersive audio to get into immersive audio, and those that are already immersive audio get better with immersive audio. Now, let's start off my questions with one that probably a lot of people have asked you. Kind of when artists usually create music, they are very stereo focused and try to kind of get to the immersive part by upmixing. That's actually something, quite frankly, also I have done, and a lot of people are actually asking me, kind of turning something that was stereo into immersive. But you point out that the correct approach is actually to think immersive first. And how do you approach that? Or what are your recommendations?
Well, first of all, history repeats itself. It's the shift from mono to stereo was exactly the same. I always give the example of the Beatles in the 60s. The first stereo albums of the Beatles, they were just done in a few afternoons by a few engineers. The Beatles weren't there themselves because stereo was not important in the 60s, although it was invented in the 30s, but even then in the 60s. When did it change? That's in the early 70s when musicians started thinking and working in stereo. For instance, Atom Heart Mother from Pink Floyd, there's this motorbike racing from the one side to the other side. And when I was a young child, my elder brother put a headphone on me and said, listen to this album. I said, wow, this is great. It's really moving. And that was an extraordinary experience. And in fact, we have the same. There are a lot of bad Atmos mixes, which is not very good promotion, and that's the same like in the old Beatles stereo albums or Bob Dylan, where the voice is in one speaker and the guitar is in the other. If you do the same with Atmos, then a song just can fall apart, because when you do something afterwards, and especially with older records, they're conceived in stereo. There a lot of money and effort is put to make it sound as the best it can be on stereo speakers. So if you then do the translation, it can work. Of course, it can work, and it's fun to do. But it's not always a guarantee. And also, the stereo version is already there. So listen to it in stereo, no problem. And when you start thinking in immersive, then you also make music in a different way. Because you hear immediately when you just play something, oh, it's from this side, it's all around. I can add something from this part, from that part, and then your brain is starting to react in a different way. And I think that's for me that's the future. Besides live recordings and classical recordings and jazz recordings, where the musicians play and the recording engineer is doing an immersive setup, but for all the other cases, we really need to start thinking. in immersive.
Yeah, you said something that is actually really interesting. I actually have a video coming out. I'm not quite sure if it's going to come out before this one or after this one, where I review a pair of headset that actually has multiple speakers in the ear cups, and in order to do that, I actually kind of listened through the Apple Spatial Audio kind of mixes, and it's kind of amazing how many really bad mixes there are, right? So from really, really well-known artists, it's quite astonishing, really. Isn't that a bit of an issue that sort of most of the really well-known artists don't really have good immersive mixes that people can listen to?
Yeah, but it's there's a contradiction. On one side, Dolby Atmos is the most famous immersive format for the moment. There's a lot of also money from Apple, from Dolby itself, behind this format to push it, and it's really pushing it. One of the things what I really don't like is the fact that you have to upload an Atmos mix at the same time with the stereo, with the same name, the same length, so that the consumer doesn't know what he's listening to, unless you're conscious and you change the settings of your Apple Music, for instance. But they just do like it's the same. But it's not the same. If you should release an Atmos version besides the stereo and with no limits and with a free or new interpretation, I'm sure that the result will be better. And it's just to fill the catalog that we need a lot of mixes, and there's no budget anymore. It's done in a very quick time period. So that's the reason why it also can be a bad promotion. So we always have to look for the good ones.
It's kind of you're kind of to some extent cognitively I was aware of that, but kind of reviewing those headphones actually made it so obvious. I was going through the list and kind of I was already at the point where I said, well, these headphones really sound bad, and then I finally got to a mix that actually worked, and then I started to realize, no, it's not the headphones, it's the mixes. It's fascinating. Now, kind of continuing on that thought, in your first chapter, you talk about the skeptics, and they are calling Dolby Atmos a fad, right? What's your strongest argument that this is here to stay? What do you think? Why people are going to listen to that in the future?
Well, if only the headphone experience will be better, then it's worth doing it. And most of the people are listening to music on headphones, and if that experience can be better, then it's here to stay. Because then also people maybe don't care; they just get a better sound quality, no matter what it's called. And I think that is the biggest difference from the old 5.1 surround, etc., where you need 6 speakers, and if you don't have 6 speakers, you can't hear it. So this is translating to different formats. And I also tried this Sonos Era 300, I think it's the name, and it's a very small smart speaker, and the sound is amazing. It's not the same as in a big studio, but it's so much better than stereo, and those things are affordable and give just a better experience for the listener, and this means that you can make one format which can translate on different platforms, and that's, I think, is the future. Just make one format which can translate well. If it's Atmos, maybe another format, because that's maybe another topic. You have to trust what you hear, and as a mixing engineer with Dolby Atmos, you don't know exactly what the result will be. In other formats, you will have a better idea how the final result will be, and maybe that's more important.
Now, speaking of other formats, and we're probably going to talk about your selection of digital audio workstations a little bit later, but you're working with Nuendo, if I remember correctly in the book. Now, one thing that I was actually curious about over the last couple of months, Pro Tools actually added a lot of features, right? So one of the things that they did is that you can actually switch between different formats seamlessly. And if you're starting in Dolby Atmos, you can switch over to Sony 360 and all kinds of formats, and you can switch back and forth, and kind of it automatically adjusts. Does this mean that kind of engineers should look more into kind of working with systems that can actually support multiple formats simultaneously?
Well, it's hitting one of the weakest points in the whole immersive discussion, because there are too many formats, and we don't know what the future will bring. And I just hear a lot of people are just waiting to see who will be the winner of this new format war. In the meantime, there are a couple of alternatives competing with each other. And if you have one system in which you can just, with the switch of a knob, have different versions, then I think that's very important to do. That it's not only Atmos, but if you also... And also let's wait for Eclipse audio, and when it will be rolled out on the YouTube channel, which is the biggest streaming platform in the world. So that can change a lot of things. So if you have... the important thing is, I think, just to have one project which you can translate in different formats. That's where we need to go to. For the moment, because Dolby Atmos is dominant and market leader, you can just stay with Dolby Atmos. But then you can survive, or when Dolby Atmos maybe will get some troubles, then it's wasted effort. Because a lot of systems are made to measure to Dolby Atmos, very good systems, but it's limited to Dolby Atmos. And I'm not sure if that's really future-proof.
I mean, the thing that kind of, to me, is interesting is that kind of there are a lot of formats out there, but many of them are kind of built on MPEG-H, kind of Sony 360. Audio Vivid, I'm told, is pretty much a copy. So you should kind of be aware of what things are happening out there, but probably, you're right, Dolby Atmos is probably the safest bet right now. Now, my channel is a channel that is primarily viewed by people who are semi-professionals or hobbyists, right? So I don't necessarily kind of attract the professional crowd, at least not at a broad scale. And many of my viewers essentially have the problem that they need to figure out how to do that on a budget. And in your book, you actually explain how to do that. And I see in your studio, you kind of the speakers back. And actually, there is a picture of your studio in the book, which I found really interesting, because it shows that you can actually do a lot with actually relatively little investment. So I'm kind of curious if you could kind of expand a little on your approach to a budget-friendly studio. Right? One thing that I noticed, for example, is that you actually have two different types of speakers, right? So in the back, I see the iLoud that are probably the iLoud MTMs, right? And then you have different speakers in the front.
Yeah, that one over there, that's the PMC. Those are my stereo monitors, because I'm also doing mastering. And this is for stereo mastering. And beside that, I've got, in my case, 15 iLoud MTM speakers, and 2 subs from Dyne Audio, because there wasn't any from iLoud at that time. I've chosen for a 9.1.6 system, because it's the highest resolution for most formats, especially for Dolby Atmos. But it's not necessary. If you start from the beginning, what is the first thing you need to purchase? Is headphones, binaural renderer, and the head tracker. And with the combination of those 3, you really can start and have an immersive. That's what you also do on your channel. Most of your videos, you're always talking about the binaural rendering of translation of the sound, and it really works well. So that's the first thing, for sure. And then if you have a headphone, let's say €300 or dollars, Virtuoso is only €50 sometimes less. And a head tracker, I also have the Superware, which is 80. So that's €500 or dollar, and you're ready to go. So that's the first thing. And I really believe that the best thing is to build up gradually. unless you know in advance by sure that you want to go bigger. What do I mean with this? For instance, if you just have a 5.1.2 system, that's already a good starting point. If you have headphones and then have this real space with only 8 speakers, you already can do something with it. And then you only need a standard audio interface with 8 outputs, which is not expensive, not at all. If you have, if you should buy a new one and you have an interface with an ADAT output, then you can just buy a second one if you want to have more speakers, and then you can gradually grow if you got the budget for it. But I think that is important. Just do it step by step. Unless you're already a mixing engineer and really want to attract clients or something, but that's not the hobbyist world.
Now, in your studio, are you also doing professional work with your Atmos setup, or is it only with the stereo that you're doing professional work?
I also do professional work. I also do mixing for some people and some checking of ADM files, with the knowledge that I don't have a very expensive high-end pro studio, so I know what the difference is for sure. But you can get pretty good results if you know what you're doing, I think. Being a mastering engineer in the stereo world before really helps, I think, in thinking more on sonical details. But if you upload something to a streaming service, you can work from a home studio. Yeah.
Did you have to do anything in order to make sure that the speakers are calibrated so that they actually fit? I'm kind of curious because a lot of people actually kind of sometimes Frankensteining their kind of studio by having different types of speakers and then trying to figure out which speakers go where. What's your recommendation in terms of the different that you kind of how do you optimize the impression by using if you use different speakers?
Well, first of all, the different formats has got different speaker setups. Like the Dolby Atmos setup is different from Auro 3D or Sony 360. But if you go for Dolby Atmos, there's this Dart Excel file which you find on the Dolby website, which is a very helpful document, Excel document, in where you can enter the room dimensions, the amount of speakers, and they will do the calculations of timing difference. Which you can adjust in your system. In my case, I've chosen for the Audient Aurea audio interface, and that's connected to SonarWorks. The SonarWorks, we all know, it's a lot of people use it for stereo calibration. They also have a multi-channel version. And the advantage of this audio interface is that the settings of the SonarWorks are saved inside the audio interface, so I don't need to add a separate plugin. But you can do that. So it's a time difference you have to take into account, and if you do calibrate also with the IQ Multimedias, with these speakers, but Genelec has got the same system. So with one calibration mic, it's like impulse responses, and then they have a DSP inside the speaker to adjust the signal. So that's more or less easy to do. It just takes 45 minutes for an immersive setup. But SonarWorks is a cheap, relatively cheap. Alternative to and in every DAW in which you work, you can load this instance and do the compensation, and then you're ready to go.
So the Aurea interface has 16 analog outputs, if I remember correctly, right? So you have your speakers connected to that directly. A lot of people are very happy with that one.
But if you have, you also can connect two interfaces with 8 outputs, but it's important to have the same trademark. If you have different interfaces, there's big trouble. The communication is not that well.
Kind of Behringer, I think is the correct pronunciation. Is very popular because it's probably the lowest cost. But kind of I think if you want to go a little bit more professional, then the audio interface is probably kind of at the sweet spot of cost versus value. Yeah, that's true. Now you already talked a little bit about headphones and kind of the need to kind of be aware of how people are actually listening to the mix because most of them are listening on headphones. So what's your opinion about mixing in headphones? Can you only mix with headphones? And kind of it's sort of the question is, how do you approach that? Is it ever necessary to go to speakers, and kind of what exactly is your approach to that?
Well, you can go very far with only headphones. Because of the fact that a lot of people are listening to music on headphones, you could have a reaction, oh, that's the ultimate playback format, so I only need headphones because that's my target audience. But of course, it's the same with stereo. Going from a big system to a small system, it's easier than the other way around. So we can go pretty far with headphones, but in my, and I did a lot of testing of a lot of different headphones and also binaural renderers. The most important thing is, do you hear something at the back, or with a not that well calibrated system, you hear the music here, and it's the more further to the back you can hear, the better the system is. And to my surprise, I have a very, very expensive headphones for stereo mastering. Too expensive headphones. It's like you only can do that when you have professional clients. But this expensive stereo headphone, even with a head tracker, doesn't have the same translation of the back speakers than a cheaper one, because that's made for stereo. So like these I love the Sennheiser 490, but also the Neumann with the rhyme system, which is very, very good. So that is those are systems of which you can have a little bit more front to back experience, and that's always the ultimate test. Do you really hear? Close your eyes, don't look at your screen. Do you really hear something? In my case, HRTF was also important. So I have the luck that I have my own measurement of HRTF, and that was a difference. So head-related transfer function, because every shape of your head and ears are different from people to people. So also how in acoustic world sound enters your ear. So, and that has to be translated in one way or the other on headphones. There are a lot of generalized HRTFs, and some of them are pretty well if you have virtuoso, and you just have to select the different options they have and just find one that that suits you and stick with it. But like always, the most important thing is know what you hear. If you don't know what you're hearing, then even with the best system, your opinion will be diffused. For instance, you can do a mix on the cheap on earbuds if you want, but you really have to know what you're listening to. And if you have a lot of experience and a lot of testing, that you exactly know these speakers are sounding like this, then you can go very far. And that's the most important thing. It's practice. It's listen to a lot of music constantly. And then it's very important. It's not I'm buying headphone and net tracker and I'm maybe 5 or 8 speakers and I'm done. No, there's always a time when you need to go to a professional studio with a mix of you to do the comparison. And that's how you really learn how to listen to your headphones. That you know, okay, if it's there, then this is how it sounds. You really have to learn that. I think that is important.
You bring up a very important point. Kind of my feeling is that sometimes the brain is really normalizing to what you are expecting to hear, right? So if you have the experience, or if you have immersed yourself in a professional Atmos studio and kind of can recall that experience, it does help. For me, and kind of, you probably saw that video a while back when I was looking at the Sony virtual mixing environment, and we did that in our studio. This made such a huge difference, because every time I then kind of used the virtual mixing environment, I could close my eyes and kind of envision myself in the studio, and I immediately understood essentially how everything works. This did not work without that kind of recall of the actual situation in which I was in that studio. So that's actually, I think, something important. You don't have to have like your professional studio yourself, but you should expose yourself once in a while to being in such a studio to understand how things are actually sounding in a high-end studio.
Yeah. That's also how I learned to do mastering. I was connected with a real studio in Hamburg, the Mastering Academy. And when I was sending my files to them, it was in real time. They were listening to their speakers, which were, you can buy a house from that amount of money. And that reaction did realize the depth and how I had to interpret the sound I got from my own speakers.
Yeah. As I said before, a lot of the listeners viewers of my channel are hobbyists. And one thing that I really liked about your book is that it really covers everything. So you also cover a lot of practical tips on how to actually do things and how to make sure that things sound good in a Dolby Atmos mix. And one of the things that continuously comes up is that if you are a hobbyist or kind of somebody who is not really on a high-end budget, usually you rely on virtual instruments and kind of things that are primarily stereo these days. So what's your recommendation? How would you turn something that is stereo into something that kind of really fills out the room without being too muddy or anything?
Well, that's one of the things which interests me a lot. I'm a big fan of virtual instruments. I'm a bit addicted to virtual instruments, I think. But what you can do is, if you just have a stereo instrument, and first things first, you need to listen on a multi-channel bus, like 7.1.4, 9.1.6. And if you load a stereo track with a stereo virtual instrument, there are a couple of things you can do. First, you can do the combination of different instruments, sending to different speakers. That you have like an answer from the back to something which is happening before. You can do like a communication between musicians just by using different virtual instruments. The second thing is there are a lot of instruments with a lot with different mic positions. There are a lot of instruments have got at least three: the close mic, the outriggers, or the back. And if you copy one instance of one instrument 3 times, and you just send it to a different speaker, then you really have this feeling that you're immersed with this instrument, because it's the same sound, but you're using. And for the first time, I'm really using these mic settings. When I was working in stereo, what you normally do is you make a mix of different mics, and that is your mix, and that's the sound you hear. But now you don't need to make that mix. Now you just add a few instances, and you're in the middle of the room. And that is so stunning. If you go to more high-end libraries, like some from Spitfire or Orchestral Tools, they sometimes have 12, 14 different mic positions. So you can have in every speaker a different mic. So it's really like you're in the middle of the recording. And that's what I mean by being inspired, by making music starting in immersive, because the feeling you've got to be immersed with this sound makes you make new artistic decisions. And that's just with stereo instance. What you also can do is just put the stereo instance in the front, left, right, whatever, and make a reverb group with three different, the same reverb, but three different settings, like the close, mid, far, and connect that with different speakers. And if you then just send one stereo virtual instrument to this reverb group, you're immersed immediately. So you're making, it's like an upmixing, but it's not with the content of the sound itself, because in an upmixing plugin, you will separate the sound and spread it through different speakers. Now you're adding new reflections, but it has got the same immersive feelings. So because those are the three things, you can work with padding, you can do an upmixing, or you can just add a new signal, which a reverb can do. And also because there are a lot of multi-channel effect plugins. A lot of them are very expensive, not worth the money, to be honest. Because it's part of the history. Those were invented or made for the film industry. They've got bigger budgets than we have as a musician, but the price stays the same. And luckily, there are also cheaper alternatives, which are very important. I also mentioned that in my book, when it's a cheap one, that you know which one you have to choose. But even, for instance, if we're talking about reverb, it's not always giving you a better sound by using a multi-channel reverb. Sometimes the channel is more pure and less muddy if you just use stereo reverb and place it only at the back. Then you have the dry signal in front, and at the back you've got the reverb sound. And the combination of those two really makes a very immersed feeling. Yeah.
That's fascinating. That's fascinating. But by the way, did we already mention that this is an excellent book that everybody needs to purchase? I like the idea because you're absolutely right. Many of those, especially reverbs, right? Those are especially the ones that were designed or developed particularly for film production, right? They are very expensive. Vienna Symphonic Library comes to mind. And kind of the fact that most people already have all the tools available to them is I think it's a very interesting and very important observation. So for those out there, if you want to get into immersive production, you don't need to actually purchase anything. You probably already have everything that you need. And you can simply use the tricks that Gert kind of pointed out in his book and kind of do it that way. And I think that works really well. One thing that comes up a lot, and people ask me a lot, is especially in Dolby Atmos, the lack of sort of a mastering channel or a master bus. Now, there have been developments in the last couple of months where some companies, I'm thinking particularly Fiedel Audio, trying to kind of reintroduce that into the process. But a lot of people are still kind of very confused about the fact that there is no master bus. So the question is, how do you approach that you are lacking this possibility to glue things together?
Well, that's a very important thing, and also one of the limitations of Dolby Atmos. You have 128 tracks, which needs to work together in one way or the other. And you already mentioned Fiedler Audio. Fiedler just broke the code, and he succeed in making a real master channel with plugins, his own system, which work with 128 tracks at the same time. So there is a solution before that, and the funny thing is, there's a lot of Dolby Atmos has got a lot of limitations, and during the years, engineers are always looking for solutions to avoid these limitations and find a solution. Instead of changing the format, the engineers are looking for workarounds. Like, for instance, this sidechain compression thing. What you can do is send every track in your project to one mono signal, which will build the sidechain, which is connecting to the compressor on every channel. So you have this mimic of a mix bus, but that's a lot of work to do, and it's not necessary. And maybe my approach is less common, even in stereo. I'm one of the few exceptions. I put nothing on my master bus. And that's really an exception. And normally there's a lot of compressor and equalizing and saturation on the master bus. I never do that. Why? Two reasons. First, I'm also a mastering engineer, and I like to do that in mastering. But by not adding something on the master bus, force me to make my groups and my buses more cohesive, and that's my point of view. You have to catch transients from the beginning, work on buses, do bus processing, and at the end there's still the safety net. You still can do, and you can use Fiedler Audio or Waveflap Pro. Whatever, but that makes the music more. It benefits the music, because otherwise you're listening to, for instance, a bus compressed general system, and you don't need to, and you're not thinking anymore during the production and the mixing of all those separate elements. And if you don't have a master bus, you're forced to make your building blocks better. And when the building blocks are better, your general composition will be better. So, in my perspective, it's not a limitation for Dolby Atmos that it doesn't have a proper mix bus.
Yeah, it's as I said before, right? So when I reviewed those headphones and I had to go through the Apple Spatial Audio list and listen to everything in 7.1.4. I noticed that's kind of, there are good mixes and bad mixes, but the good mixes all shared something that I found really interesting, and that is everything was sitting in kind of in a proper place, and that there was a clear understanding that the mix was not upmixed, but it was sort of, everything was in its place, and there was no gluing in that sense, right?
Yeah.
Because as soon as you start to glue, everything kind of falls apart. So I liked it. Now, obviously, you're a mastering engineer, and kind of that kind of changes things. A lot of people out there who kind of do their own mastering, kind of fold everything into a single process, and kind of it falls apart.
Yeah, but you can. This can work in stereo, but it's more difficult when you work multi-channel, because you've got so much tracks and channels, and if you only rely on the master bus, then you're not aware of the quality of every single element in this mix, and that's why I like this different stages. First, you work on track base, and that is to handle transients and the sound color and the character of the sound. And then you send those to buses, to groups, instrument groups, whatever. And there you can do bus processing. And everything at the end will be joined together. And I think that's much better to have a well-balanced mix.
So is Fiedler Audio's Armada, which is sort of the plugin that allows you to use plugins throughout your entire Dolby Atmos mix, if you kind of use the Fiedler Audio ecosystem, is that a good development or a bad development then?
Absolutely good.
Okay.
No, it's made for these buses. So if you just put it on all your group tracks, those tracks also can communicate with each other. So you will have this kind of master bus on a group bus level. And that really fixes a lot of limitations, because with only purchasing one plugin, you can use all your old plugins. And that is important. So you don't need multi-channel plugins. When I started with Dolby Atmos, I spent a lot of money in buying multi-channel plugins, because I thought, now I need multi-channel plugins. I already had too many plugins, but no. And this is a solution, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I do like it too. I'm still kind of amazed that nobody did that before Fiedler, right? I mean, there was the Waves one, but that is a little controversial. But Fiedler Audio really kind of nailed that one. I really like that a lot. I did a video, so in case you guys want to hear or see, kind of, I'm going to leave a link in the description. Now, we already talked about the fact that you prefer to be format agnostic, and we already said that you're working with Nuendo, and we already also said that sort of Nuendo and Pro Tools are really the two options that you have if you want to be really super agnostic. So what's your recommendation if somebody is not already using one of those and is kind of using, for example, Ableton or Logic, or kind of, well, Logic is pretty good too, right? But how can they future-proof their workflows?
Well, the first thing is work with a final mix bus in the highest possible channel count. That makes you enables you to mix it immersive, with spreading the sound around and sending to different speakers. And if you want to have the options in the future to do different work in different projects, different formats, before the mix bus, and what I do, I have a 3 or 4 step approach. The first is your individual tracks; those are connected to multi-channel buses. So this is the highest channel count, like in Logic it's 714. Then you have to work in that channel count. And then I'm sending this, in my case, to 4 main buses. One is for all the sounds which are moving. The other, all the static sounds. I also like to work in ambisonics. That's another main bus. And then I have a main bus for all my effects. And those 4 go to a monitor system, and that you can do in every DAW. And it's important if you have different groups. For instance, a good way could be not work with the internal, for instance, in Logic with the internal renderer, but use, for instance, Fiedler's Dolby Atmos composer. Because if you use, for Atmos, if you use this program, you make different group tracks which are sent to the different speakers in the composer with the Beam plugin. But at the same time, every other system always work with this kind of a send plugin and then a renderer plugin. If you replace the Fiedler of the Dolby Atmos Beam into an Eclipse plugin or into if you want to play live for an Elisa system, it's the same principle. You just insert an Elisa plugin and then an Elisa renderer to perform live. And then you have just one session which you can translate in different formats. And I think that's makes it more flexible. That's one thing. The other thing, but that's only, well, no, that's the disadvantage of Steinberger, of Cubase and Nuendo, because if you work with internal Atmos renderer, the sample rate has to be on no, the buffer size has to be 512, which is too low for an Atmos project. It's not working. It's only working when you start with well-recorded audio files, and you don't need to do much processing, and you don't work with any virtual instrument at all. But if you want to make a big project and with new music and virtual instruments, then you need 1024, 2048 as buffer size. And that was, in my case, the reason why I worked this channel agnostic, so I just can work in 2048 buffer size. So there's a lot of room for calculations and working with virtual instruments. And when I decide, no, I'm going turn this into a Dolby Atmos project, I just freeze the tracks or I render it, and I lower the buffer size to 512. So that's one of those technical things which is an add-on in comparison to stereo. Stereo, you just set up and everything's working perfectly. But every system has got different architecture. But you can work perfectly in Ableton Live, in Logic, like also wrote, Reaper is the most flexible of all. If you are a bit into computer programming, it's the best of it. And maybe if I should start all over again, maybe I will work in Reaper. But I started with Cubase, hold your horses, in '91, Cubase version 2, I think. So it's part of my DNA. And we all know the best DAW is just the one you know best. It's always like this. And yeah, and I try other. I also have Logic and Ableton and Pro Tools, but it's mainly for helping students, also that I can answer some questions.
Yeah, it's sort of I have the same. So kind of I have also a license for pretty much any digital audio workstation, just in case somebody asks a question. Now the Fiddler Audio renderer, or the Fiddler Audio Dolby Atmos Composer has a free version. So in case anybody out there wants to kind of try that out, you can actually do that without any costs. Now that free version does not allow the integration of the Armada plugin that we talked a little bit earlier, but you can still kind of get started and your feet wet. I also have to say that Reaper grew a lot on me over the last couple of months, right? So kind of when I started out, Reaper was sort of the kind of the engineering kind of version of a digital audio workstation, functionality over form, right? I mean, it can do anything, but in order to do that, you sometimes need to know exactly what you're doing. But I think once you get used to that, it starts to grow on you. It has its kind of peculiarities and certain things. Sidechaining, for example, is a bit of a mess. But you know, kind of it is a nice DAW, and it's technically not free, but you know, kind of it's sort of a lot of people use it like free, so you can have this unlimited trial period. So that's certainly a good option to start.
Absolutely, and there are also a lot of free plugins you can use. But on the other hand, and that's also when you work in DAW like Nuendo, there's so much included. You've got so much plugins which are very, very good. It's the ambisonics conversion is done automatically. You don't need any inserts. Another thing makes it easy to work with. And so once again, the best one is the one you know best. So stay with the DAW you have and try to get the maximum out of it. Because it's like driving a car. You don't want to think about, no, I have to press this and I have to do this. No, it has to go automatically, especially when you want to be creative. And I wasted a lot of time in programming and in trying systems that I'm not creative anymore. And that's also very frustrating after a while. You really need to make something. And maybe that brings me back to the thing about start thinking in immersive, and because the music I make for the moment, I compose in immersive, and just by playing, for instance, a piano, the Audio Brewers, which we both very very much. They have this piano, felt piano, recorded in ambisonics, and if you just play that piano, you're inside this piano. It's this feeling is so different than a normal stereo one, and so you start composing in a different way, and that's so fun. And to be able to do this, you need this automatism in your workflow. That's why I have a lot of controllers. I'm not only a control freak, I'm also a controller freak with a lot of for instance, here, this is the rotor control from Melbourne. Yeah. These are my monitor settings. Like this is my Nuendo binaural. This is the Virtuoso binaural. This is Apple Spatial. This is Rhyme. This is my reference track. And I just have to click and I can turn the volume. And that makes it easy. That's like in a very fast way, I can just listen to different mixes. Of course, yeah.
You have a very impressive control surface there. That's kind of that's really impressive. I actually on my channel never talked about Audio Brewers sample libraries. Alejandro actually started out that way, and he told me that his studio, which I was able to visit earlier this year, which is amazing, by the way. He essentially has a room inside a room. Right? He disconnected it from everything. And the reason he did that is because at the time, he was working on sample libraries. So I should probably kind of do a video about those, because those are, these days, we are mainly kind of looking at Alejandro doing his Ambisonics plugins, but, you're absolutely right. The sample libraries
But if you want to make
attention.
immersive music, those immersive instruments can be helpful. It's the same with Sound Particles Skydust.
Yeah.
It's a synthesizer, but you're inside the music. And something which is also very interesting, and not a lot of people know this, is NAF, N-A-F-F. It's from Mexico. It's one guy, a classical composer, but also a mathematics engineer. And he made an instrument. It's for contact player with almost no settings. But when you play the instrument, the velocity will change the sound. So you're playing an instrument, and you hear these immersive sounds, and that is a nice addition to the instruments we already have. Just to get new ideas. But it's the same if you work with Contact or with Alien or with another or UVI, whatever. All those sample players have got multiple outputs, and if you have just one template and you connect all those different outputs to different speakers, you just load one instrument and you can spread it around, and that makes it also very easy to compose in immersive.
Yeah. NAF audio, you said. I'm probably going to put a link in the description for everybody to kind of look at that, because that's
9 angles for 40.
9 angles for 40.
Yeah, NAFF.
Okay. Okay. So I'm going to put a link to that in the description so that people can check that out. That sounds actually really, really interesting. Now, one thing that comes up a lot with people is a confusion about the low frequency effects channel. Especially when I started out. These days I don't get these questions as often anymore, but at the very beginning, when we started to look into Dolby Atmos, a lot of people got completely confused about what that is. And you're pointing out in your book that is actually meant as something that was supposed to augment movie experiences, right? And now people are kind of using that maybe in the wrong way. So what's your recommendation? How should somebody kind of work with the low frequency effects channel?
The shortest answer, you don't need it. Because people are using it because it's there. But it doesn't need to be there. But because it's there, it's better to use it, but not trust it, not build on it. So the main thing is make your whole mix with on your normal speakers, and left right need to be full frequency, and all the low frequencies put in the left right. That's mainly the front, and only because there are systems with an LFE, with a subwoofer, then it's good that there's some signal in it. And what you can do is, and that is important, is you have to make a send channel to the LFE, where you put a high cut filter that you filter all the high frequencies. Also a small subharmonic generator just for translation issues, that the signal will be decorrelated. And then you can just use this as low frequency enhancer. The low frequencies you can send a little bit to the LFE, just for the systems who have an LFE. But if you do a stereo down mix, the LFE channel is not used. So you can't build on it, and so it's not that important. But it's important, for instance, if you upload ADM file to a streaming service and you don't have a high cut filter on your LFE, the track will be rejected by Apple Music.
Interesting.
So those are things you need to know, because you don't hear it on your headphones, you don't hear it in your system, but it's one of those checklist things.
That's actually something that a lot of people at the very beginning were really confused about. The fact that in the down mix, right, in the stereo, I think also in the binaural down mix, the LFE is not taken into consideration. So if you actually send your low frequencies or everything that you think would normally come out of a subwoofer into the LFE, then there's something missing in the down mix. So what's your approach with that? So I see you say like just a little bit in case you want to kind of have it for somebody who actually takes advantage of that LFE.
Yeah, and it's important to make a distinction between the subwoofer and the LFE channel. It's not the same. So a subwoofer is a speaker with low frequencies. So what I do, I have two subwoofers. One is the extension of my left and right. And the second is the extension of my center speaker. Because I have small iLoud speakers, which don't have this bass frequency. This way, I have full frequency in my front wall. And that is important. Second, the LFE channel and the subwoofer is used for those two things at the same time. The LFE channel is, well, no, it's used for the low frequency signals you send it consciously, but also for bass management. And bass management is very important. Like in my case, those small speakers, I have a filter on 80 hertz, and everything below bass management system goes to the subwoofer to hear this signal. That also can be confusing. So therefore, it's also important to concentrate for low frequencies to the front wall. Also not in the height speakers. In the height speakers, I have a low cut filter at 1.5K. So nothing below will go above. And that's also psychoacoustically. We as a human being can't hear sounds that well from above. And when there's low frequency, we got very confused. There's no local frequency in the air. So that needs to be filtered. And if you filter that signal, it's also not sending that signal via bass management to the subwoofers, because otherwise your system will be overloaded. So in fact, it's very simple. There are two things. First, you need to have a full range listening experience, or you can have headphones which go very low, or you have speakers, and if you have not speakers that with very low possibilities, then you can add a subwoofer to as an extension to these speakers. And then the LFE channel is just like an extra. You put some extra sounds in for people who have it when there's a system where you can hear it. But it's really it's from the cinema. One of the first was Jurassic Park. It was for the big dinosaurs that you can feel the rumbling in the movie theater. So that's the reason why it was invented. But we don't need it actually.
Yeah, I think the confusion comes a lot from this because we name it like in the same way, right? So you talk about a 7.1 system, and then the 7.1 system in a home theater would kind of the 0.1 would be the subwoofer, but actually we are talking when you're talking about the 0.1 is actually the LFE, which is something different. So there's a little bit of a confusion in the terminology that I think a lot of people, unless they kind of understand the reason for the LFE, are usually a little bit confused about. When it comes to the loudness, many people are, kind of there was this loudness war, obviously. And we gotten a little bit past that, which doesn't necessarily mean that people are still kind of trying to maximize loudness. It's interesting that it actually came back to some extent. Kind of electronic music is still kind of mastered to -5-6 lufs because. But in Dolby you have very strict requirements in the loudness to -18 lufs. So what does this change in the dynamic range that you suddenly have? How do you work with it? What does it mean in working with Dolby Atmos?
When working in Dolby Atmos, you need to be fully aware of this limitation. When you work in stereo, a lot of, especially hobbyists, they don't care. They just make their track, and maybe in mastering they will fine-tune it and put a limiter on it. But it's more difficult in Dolby Atmos. So you have to take in account the different steps and that you're not going too loud. So gain staging is even more important. So you have to start with every track which is not too loud, every bus which is not too loud. So there's some metering things, and therefore having two screens is very useful. That you have a good metering, that you know exactly which direction, which ballpark you're playing. But to get this minus 18, and that again, it's an advantage and disadvantage of working in multi-channel. You've got more possibilities, but the end result will be better. If you just do the stereo tricks on a multi-channel, then everything will be compressed too much. It's too loud, so we will compress it at the end. That's again this gain staging throughout the whole process. But this doesn't mean that you can't have a loud mix. It doesn't mean that you don't have a compressed mix. If you really want to have a compressed signal, you can bus compress something to hell. But just to do the input and output in reverse, that you just distort the sound. So the sound, if you really want to have a compressed sound, that's possible. But at the end, it can't be that loud. So it's not that you can't make any power record with Dolby Atmos. No, that's possible. But on the other hand, just because of the fact that this limitation of loudness forces you to think about it, and I'm a strong advocate for dynamic range. So the music will be better, absolutely, and. The only reason to go louder is because an artistic decision that you want to have a compressed sound, and that's possible. But take the advantage of the fact that you can go from very loud to very quiet, because this LUFS integrated, so it's the average of the total, and that makes encourage you to put a lot of variation into your music.
Now that is to some extent clear for somebody who is making music and mastering music and mixing music. But one thing that I found is that the general audience out there, right, the people who are actually listening to this are so much used to this highly compressed music that they have a bit of it's sort of almost like the fact that it's so compressed becomes the type of quality that people are looking for, because that's sort of what they expect music to be. Is there sort of an issue working with audience expectations when you kind of work with higher levels of dynamic range?
Mm. Well, it's correct what you're saying, but on the other hand, not completely, because people are not always that aware of the loudness of a track. They all have a volume knob on their system and just put it louder. So it's not that, for instance, Billie Eilish can sound very loud, but the loudness is not that high like Katy Perry, for instance. So the experience of loudness is more complicated than that. It's so it's not only the volume knob, but also the normalizing, which is done on the streaming sites. So if you know, people are Spotify is normalizing everything to minus 14 LUFS. That's not that big difference from Dolby Atmos, especially when you know that, for instance, Apple Music will turn it up to minus 16. So minus 16 and minus 14, it's more or less the same. So from a consumer side, at the streaming, there's not that much difference. And for instance, if you compare Dead Magnetics from Metallica, one of the loudest albums ever, it's a minus 3 LUFS. So there's it's just one sausage. And if you compare this, for instance, with Brothers in Arms from Dire Straits, which is minus 12 or something, but you loudness normalize it the same way on the Spotify norms, Dire Straits will sound louder than Metallica. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So it's more complicated than that, and you don't have to take all of these issues into account, but it can't let you off to say, oh, we can't make loud music. No, that's not possible.
Yeah,
you can do a lot of things with -18.
I fully agree with that, and Dire Straits. I think that was one of my first CDs when back in the days, right? So it's a CD that you actually had to have because it was so perfectly made, right? But what I was thinking of kind of is the sausage, right? So we are kind of we are used to listening to sausages, really.
Yeah.
And that sometimes kind of makes it probably a little difficult to kind of adopt that kind of higher dynamic range, right?
Yeah, but that is part of our culture. That's sociology. That's how we think. How we I would say we are born with an empty, yeah, not brain, but it's filled by experiences, by family, parents, things you experience. So after a while, you get used to a certain sound. For instance, Spotify is not the best sound quality, but we think that this is how music should sound. But if you hear a high resolution file afterwards, it's like a blanket is pulled away from the music. And suddenly you hear all these details and they say, oh, this is great. So you have to experience something different. But well, let's be honest, most of the people don't care. And it's not a problem. If you're in a train or a tram and you see all the people with headphones on, that's not in the best sound quality, and that's one of the things which is also important for immersive, because there are two possible future solutions. The one is it will be the next big thing and it will replace stereo, and then I'm settled. Or the other is that it's just an added value for a niche, and if it's that way, okay, then it's this way. Then it's art again, and that's not that of a problem. Of course, I want to reach as biggest audience as possible. So I really want that one form of immersive audio will be the next ultimate dominant format. But if it's not, it's not going to disappear, because it's just artistically it's a better form of music experience, and that's the main thing. And this enjoyment you can have, and the feelings, the energy you got by hearing a very nice immersed sound, just makes you happy, and that's why I'm doing it.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's a very good point that you're making there. Now, one thing that as you know, I do a lot of work in artificial intelligence also, and one of my thesis really is that these artificial kind of wave of content that we are encountering will lead to the fact that people are more interested in the human part of the content creation again, and I think there is a good chance that will lead to a better understanding also in terms of just simple things like dynamic range, because that's actually how music really sounds, right? The sausage is sort of the thing that the system spits out if you want to kind of turn everything into a sausage. But if you have actually somebody on stage kind of playing a real instrument, then there's usually a kind of a higher level of dynamic range. So I'm optimistic that things will actually kind of turn around a little.
Yeah, it's this interaction which is part of culture, which can't be replaced by anything, and that's why people go to concerts and experience music. But also for educational institutions, it would be good that every university, for instance, has got a kind of an immersive listening room, not. Studio grade, very expensive. No, even with soundbars, with a Sonos system, whatever. Just that people can experience this music. It's I think that's very important. And I always say to universities, don't spend all your money in one big studio. No, buy 10 smaller ones, so that more people can get used to an immersive experience.
Yeah, that's actually an issue. I mean, I said that a couple of times in my videos that I'm not in the music industry program in our university. I'm actually in game design, but we do have a very well-known music industry program, and they have just kind of created an Atmos studio built an Atmos studio, and because the building is actually on top of the underground, so there's actually the underground station underneath. They had to disconnect it completely. It's a marvelous studio, but it was really expensive. But the problem really is that it's really difficult to kind of get students in there at scale, right? I mean, it's like it's sort of you have this high-end studio, but then essentially you need to find a way to actually. So I like the sentiment that you have, that it might sometimes be better, especially if you're not really relying on a high-end studio, to have multiple places simultaneously where you can listen to that, even if it's not the highest level of quality.
Yeah, because hearing is believing. First, people need to experience it before you start appreciating it.
So we talked a lot, and once again, your book is really outstanding, and it's going to be a fixed kind of book in my library. I'm probably going to use it a lot in the future, and anybody who is working with immersive audio, I think there's just so much valuable information in there. It's just incredible. But kind of speaking, we talked a little bit about cultural kind of things, and in the book, in your bio, you say that alongside being a mastering engineer, author, and professor, we didn't really touch that, but you're also a professor. You're also kind of a microbrewer and have your own Keunen beer. Is that the way you pronounce it correctly? So the last question that I have really is if audio formats were beer styles, what kind of beer is a classic stereo mix, and what kind of beer is a fully immersive mix?
That's a nice one. Stereo mix is the industrial lager Pilsener beer. Dolby Atmos mix or immersive mix is high fermentation beer with re-fermentation inside the bottle. Let me explain a little bit, because a lager beer has got taste, but taste is like sour or sweet or bitter. But lager is made low fermentation, it's lower temperature. That means that there's no aroma. Aroma is something we experience with our nose, like grassy, flowery, pineapple, whatever. With high fermentation, you've got not only taste, you also got this aroma. And with a very complex beer, there's also the third step, and that's the time factor. So first you smell the aroma, second you taste the beer on your mouth, and third is the aftertaste in your throat. And this is like the three dimensions of immersive music. With a Pilsner beer, it's just it's bitter, and it's gone. So when it lasts and you've got these different levels, and in fact I think it's a good comparison. Kind of if you want to know what immersive audio is supposed to like, kind of get the right beer, I guess. A good artisanal small scale brewed beer with a lot of passion.
Is this just for your personal or do you also sell that?
I also sell it, but on a low scale again, because I was making a lot of music in the Nillies, released 4 albums of my own music. I got my own big band, and then I stopped. Bit of artistic frustration, didn't know what to do, and I'm always a big fan of the better Belgian beers. So I wanted to try it myself, and I cultivate my own hops. So I was making the beer, and it was really professional. I did it myself with only a 200-liter installation, but I sold it to local restaurants and pubs, and it was getting bigger and bigger. But then I don't like the beer business. There's a lot of beer mafia, which I don't want to be part of. It's really, it has to be fun again. So now it's again, I'm a hobbyist again.
You're a hobbyist again. So but I guess if somebody wants to taste it, they have to come to you, to Belgium.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're welcome. You're welcome for free tasting.
Well, thanks so much for being on the kind of on my videos and having this little interview. This was super interesting. Congratulations again to your book, and I hope you have a lot of success with it because it really deserves it. I think I mentioned it a couple of times. It's an absolute must-have for anybody who is really interested in that field. Thank you again.
Pleasure is mine, and thank you again for this opportunity.
Well, that's everything for today. As always, if you have any questions or comments, please use the comment section below or join our free Discord server. Gert posts there as well. An invite link is in the description. And if you appreciate my coverage about immersive audio and Dolby Atmos, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. I would seriously appreciate it. And with that being said, see you all in the next video.